Hello, today we're going to talk about inoculating logs with mushroom spawn. This method would work with any species that grow on logs, I believe. Just depends on how you orient the logs. But today I'm going to show shiitake. This is the easiest mushroom you can grow, they say. You need mushroom plugs. Here are some plugs that I bought by the 1,000. That's the most cost-efficient way to do it, but you can also get them in packs of 100. I have a mallet that I'm going to pound them in with to these logs. I have a drill, a 5/16 drill bit, cheese wax, a brush with silicone bristles, and this is going to get a bit messy with the cheese wax, so make sure you don't do this on your living room carpet. Shiitake, like most other species, grow on hardwood logs. That includes big leaf maple and alder, but thicker than this. You want them thicker than this. More like this size. They grow on oak also and cottonwood, but those two species aren't really abundant here. So I tend to use alders, but I also have big leaf maple. And with both maple and oak, the mushrooms will fruit for a longer period of time because the wood is denser on those trees. Everyone with wooded property has an alder to spare. And the tree needs to be fresh because if native saprophytic or decay fungi get in the logs first, then they're going to be much stronger than the shiitake because the shiitake can't compete with them because they're a weaker species. But you also don't want to start the process right after cutting the tree either, because you need to let the tree's anti-fungal defense chemicals dissipate. So once you cut your tree down and you cut the logs in the pieces that you want, you're going to lay those logs on your patio or cement or concrete blocks for about 2 to 3 weeks, anywhere off the soil. Ideally, the logs will be 6 to 10 inches in diameter. If it's smaller, the log won't last as long or it won't produce as much. And if the diameter is longer than that, it'll take much longer for the fungi to colonize the log, and it takes more plugs as well. They say the ideal length is 18 to 30 inches because at some point you'll need to soak them, and depending on how you soak them, you may need to lift them up or move them to a tub or something. And so the length really has to fit your watering method. And so if you're going to submerge it into a tub, it needs to, well, first you have to identify what your tub is, and then you have to cut it to the length that will fit into your tub. Most of mine are about 40 inches, so I'm kind of being optimistic and thinking my weather is going to be wet enough, and that if I do have to water it, I can just use a hose. If there's one takeaway, it is a dry log has dead fungi in it, or at least dead shiitake. So plan in advance how you will get water to them. It might mean you keep them closer to your house. Also, you can monitor them more easily if they're closer to your house. In terms of what time of year you want to do it, since you don't want your logs to dry out, then that would make the summertime not a good time to do it, at least in my area, because it'll be harder to keep the fungi wet, at least before they're established. You also don't want to subject the fungi to frost until at least a couple of months. If a heavy frost comes before the 2-month period, you can try to protect your logs by bringing it inside your house, which I personally wouldn't do because this is heavy and I'm doing a lot. You can do it in early spring, and that's best. If you do it after the 1st of April, there shouldn't be a really big frost after then, and at the same time, it's not going to be dry for a while. The logs will still be wet after a long wet winter. The sap will be flowing in the trees when you cut them down in about mid-March to leave that 2 to 3 week window. And so if you start with a log that is wet internally, it's not going to dry out as fast. Another option is to do it in mid to late September when our rain returns. So there it's going to get wet for a period before the frost comes. Growing mushrooms is not like growing vegetables where you can put seeds in the ground and expect a yield in a set amount of days. This is more like we're controlling decomposition. And so all you can pretty much do is keep the conditions right, help the fungi survive, keep them from dying. And in this case, you could expect a fruiting within a year. So if you're going to start it now in April, and you do everything right, then you can get a yield next April. So you can see how this can get messy. This is also the most expensive part of this whole process. And it's good to have like a burner nearby so you can keep the wax melted. The way I'm doing it, if I don't go super fast, it's gonna harden on me. And I have to take it back to my house. So you can see it's already hardening on the edges. And actually what you want to do is not just seal the holes that you made or the cuts that you made, but actually any cavity should ideally be sealed, because those are potential entry points for competing fungi. I guess one good thing about painting it is you can kind of eyeball any wide spaces that you might have missed that you think another plug should go into. And if your logs are light enough that you can dunk them in your wax, that's the fastest way to get the ends of it. Otherwise you just paint it on. And it's harder to seal when it has the moss on it. You don't have to worry about removing or your logs having any epiphytes on it, like moss or lichen, because they're not going to interfere with the mushrooms. Like here's an example of like a cavity that was already there, and so maybe I want to seal that even though I didn't put it there. You see the wax is really caking on your brush, and so I'm gonna have to reheat this before I'm done with this process. When you drill, you want to start 1 to 2 inches from the edge. The drill depth can just be the length of the plug, because the plug just needs to be flush with the log surface. And for me, I just eyeball it. And then you could have 3 to 4 inches between the holes, and you want to offset them so they form a diamond shape. And you want to keep rotating the log until you have rows all around the log. You can use a hammer or a mallet, and I used a mallet to just pound the plugs in. And then any food grade wax is fine, just get the cheapest that you can get, so soy or cheese or beeswax. So the wax, it keeps the moisture in the log and it keeps the competing fungi out. What I'm going to do with these logs, how I'm going to stack them, is I'm going to keep them on concrete blocks, but you could put them on a pallet, and you can put them on sand or kind of partially bury them in sand if that's going to help keep them moist. And then I'm going to stack them in a crib formation. You want to keep them in the shade. If you have a forest canopy, that's perfect. But remember that you don't want it to dry out. So if you think you might have to bring water to it, then just keep that in mind when you're placing it. The logs do need to be outside and not in your house, so they can experience alternating day and night. If you try to induce a fruiting by soaking the log, you can do that 2 to 3 times a year. So like maybe once in early spring, once in late spring, and again in the fall. But remember, every time you do it, the faster the log's going to decay. An alder like this could probably fruit for 3 to 4 years, and longer than that if you use a maple or oak. And by the end of its life cycle, these logs won't weigh very much. When you harvest your mushrooms, you want to make sure that they're dome shaped. If they start flattening out, you want to harvest them as soon as possible. Keep in mind that slugs like the mushrooms, and perhaps chipmunks and chickens, so you might want to protect them. And also you always want to cook them before you eat them, because mushrooms have hydrazines that are carcinogenic. If you're not going to use your plugs right away, they will store in the fridge for 6 months, but make sure you keep them dark. But that's it. Once you seal your holes and it looks like this, then the 3 things to remember are moisture. Keep them moist, and then you just need time and patience, and then hopefully they will fruit for you.